Right. My name is Kevin Shaughnessy. I'm the chair of the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. Harris was a student in my organic chemistry classes a couple years ago. He was an outstanding student and really struck me with his interest in trying to apply the things we were learning to areas that he was interested in outside of the class. I know he has a strong interest in gardening and organic farming, so I think he'll have a really interesting presentation for you. Please welcome Harris to the stage.
Gardening is the perfect hobby. I'm Harris Bolus. I'm from Birmingham, where I have a big Lebanese family as pictured here. I'm a junior. I'm majoring in nutrition on the pre-med track, and I love gardening. Before I tell you all the reasons why gardening is awesome, I'm going to give you a little bit of information about my gardening, then I'll give you some history for context, try to persuade you that gardening is the perfect hobby, and then I'll close by telling you how to get started. This is some stuff I brought in from the garden one day over the summer. I started about 4 years ago. My parents were out of town one weekend, so I decided to stay over at my grandma's house. And while I was there, I helped out in her garden. I got to talk to her about why she enjoyed it. And luckily, there's a plant nursery right next to my high school. So that week, one day after school, I stopped by, got some plants, and that was it. Every year since then, my garden's gotten bigger. Since coming to Alabama, I've been involved with schoolyard roots. I've been volunteering at the Arboretum on the weekends, and I helped start the Bee Club last semester, whose goal is to get UA certified as bee-friendly. Part of that includes planting pollinator gardens around campus, and last semester we planted one at the Arboretum, and this semester we're planting another one at the Rise Center. So here's some history to put gardening in context. Gardening has forever been an important part of what it is to be human. In fact, the discovery of agriculture is part of what allowed hunter-gatherers to form permanent settlements and eventually a global society that we have today. Victory gardens are a more modern example of how gardening can be important and impactful. Part of the intention in starting victory gardens during World War I was to alleviate food shortages during the war and to keep produce carriers free for the war effort. They were so successful that they were brought back in World War II to even greater effect. Professor Herman from the University of Mississippi State said that in 1944, more than 40% of the fresh vegetables consumed in the United States were cultivated in one of 20 million victory gardens. And Lamanda Joy, a master gardener and founder of the Peterson Garden Project, wrote that in 1942 and 43, 1,500 victory gardens were started by 175,000 Chicagoans, of whom more than 90% were new to gardening. There are also a lot of modern movements around gardening, like, as I mentioned before, the Peterson Garden Project in Chicago, schoolyard roots in Tuscaloosa, and guerrilla gardeners around the world. So now, the reasons why gardening is the perfect hobby. The first and most important one is that it's fun. Any good hobby has to be fun. And it's a lot of fun to go out into your garden and eat the stuff that you've been growing. It's also cool that when you have a garden, it becomes integrated into the ecosystem around you. So you get to see nature at work. This means things like seeing hummingbirds and mushrooms, and also getting to see the life cycles of different plants and animals. It's a great excuse to get outside and spend time with friends and family. And the fact that it's fun makes it useful for teaching kids. Gardening is also educational. And for kids, it's a great way to get them outside of the classroom, let them explore the world around them while learning subjects like biology, math, and English. And this is what we did with Schoolyard Roots. They start educational gardens at elementary schools around Tuscaloosa, partly to help alleviate food deserts in Tuscaloosa, and also for education. These gardens are really effective for teaching not only school subjects, but also things like responsibility, cultivating curiosity, and helping kids understand where food comes from, not just the grocery store. It's educational for me too. This plant is known as Atropa belladonna, also deadly nightshade. What makes it deadly is a chemical called atropine that stimulates your heart, basically until you die. This chemical, however, is also useful for the same reason in medicine. It helps treat people who have dangerously low heart rates and also some different pesticide poisoning. There are also really interesting microbiology facts that have to do with gardening, like the fact that there are more than 7 billion microorganisms in 1 teaspoon of soil. And many of you know by now that your gut bacteria are important for your health. But did you know that they're based on the soil that your food was grown in? NASA is also doing some really interesting research about plants in space, specifically how the conditions of space affect plant growth, like radiation and low gravity. Gardening also has life lessons to teach, like growing from failures. If you garden, you will have failures. It's normal, and it's important to learn from them as you move forward to see what you did wrong that year and how you can do better in the future. You also grow from failures literally by composting your plants from the last year as fertilizer for the next. Delayed gratification is pretty clear, and it teaches you to nip your problems in the bud. When you see insects on a plant or some disease starting to spread, just like in real life, these things snowball. And it's important to learn to catch them early and take care of them, otherwise they'll get out of hand. It's also dirt cheap. I mean, what do you need to start a garden? Dirt, water, compost, wood. And there are ways to make it even cheaper. If you do things like no-till gardening, which is basically just not tilling your garden to make your plants grow even better. You can use core gardening to decrease the amount you spend on watering, and you can save seeds so you don't even have to buy those in the future. Lastly, gardening is good for the environment. If you think back to the example of Victory Gardens, part of the intention was to alleviate food shortages and decrease the number of produce carriers that were carrying produce around the country. In modern terms, this translates to things like decreasing the amount you rely on unsustainable farming practices and reducing the number of trucks traveling across the country to get food to your local grocery store. You can also compost to reduce the amount that you send to landfills, and you can help preserve local wildlife by planting native and wild plants that have special relationships based on flower size and depth and things like that with local pollinators. And we all know that we need to save the bees. Now, how do you get started? You can start your own garden, however works best for you. You can also volunteer somewhere like the Arboretum, which is like a giant outdoor forest museum right off campus. They also have a community garden that's really fun to work in. There's Schoolyard Roots, as I've mentioned before, in Tuscaloosa, and Jeremiah's Community Garden, which is associated with the Holy Spirit Catholic Church here in Tuscaloosa. And if you want to be a little more social, you can join a club. I talked about starting the Bee Club last semester. I definitely encourage you all to check it out and join us for our planting day coming up soon. There's Eco Council, which aims to spread awareness and activism around environmental concerns. There's Bama Goat, which uses geriatric animal therapy at nursing homes around Tuscaloosa. But they also, while they're there, help take care of the gardens, and they're working on improving the gardens too. And there's Sustainability Coalition, which works to organize and connect different organizations around campus. Thank you for your time.